The Forgotten Legacy of Black Jesus, Why It Matters Now. There is a figure whose image has been painted over, whose presence has been systematically redefined, and whose story is more complex than the popular imagination often acknowledges. Jesus Christ. For many, Jesus has been consistently portrayed as a white European-looking figure, with light skin and straight brown hair, reflecting Western ideals of beauty and divinity. But what if I told you that? This image is a relatively modern creation, one that masks a much richer, more diverse historical and spiritual legacy. Imagine a Jesus who emerged not from the cold stone of European cathedrals, but from the warmth of African deserts, a figure deeply connected to the people, cultures, and struggles of the African continent. Imagine a Black Jesus, not as a political statement, but as an embodiment of historical truths and spiritual power that were forgotten or deliberately erased over time. In exploring the idea of a Black Jesus, we are not just seeking to challenge an image, but to uncover a deeper legacy that has the potential to transform both our faith and our understanding of justice, equality, and identity. The legacy of Black Jesus, rooted in African history and early Christian communities, is a story of resistance, perseverance, and divine connection. It is a legacy that speaks to the modern world's ongoing struggles with racial injustice and the need for a more inclusive and truthful understanding of our past. This journey into the forgotten legacy of Black Jesus is not just about history, it's about relevance. In a time when racial divisions continue to fracture communities, when historical truths are often dismissed or overlooked, and when people are searching for authentic spiritual and cultural roots, rediscovering Black Jesus offers a profound way to reconnect to both faith and identity. This is a story that needs to be heard now more than ever. If you found this exploration meaningful, be sure to subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below with your thoughts on this forgotten legacy. We'd love to hear your perspective on how rediscovering Black Jesus impacts your understanding of faith and justice. 1. The historical legacy. Jesus' African roots. The notion of a Black Jesus is not a recent creation or a revisionist effort to align history with modern cultural narratives. Instead, it represents a return to the authentic, albeit often neglected, origins of Christianity, a faith deeply entwined with the rich history of Africa. To grasp the depth of this legacy, we must first recognize that the world into which Jesus was born was far more diverse, multicultural, and interconnected than the traditional European Renaissance portrayals of Christ might suggest. Consider, for a moment, the geographical setting of Jesus' birth. He was born in Bethlehem, a town within a region that we now call the Middle East, but historically, this area belonged to a much broader and more fluid world. This region stood at the crossroads of Africa, Asia, and Europe, a meeting place where trade routes, migrations, and cultural exchanges thrived. The influence of Africa on this region, particularly ancient Palestine, cannot be underestimated. The ancient Mediterranean world was far from isolated. It was a space of active movement where ideas, people, and goods flowed freely between Egypt, Ethiopia, the Levant, and beyond. Africa, therefore, was not some distant or disconnected land from the biblical narrative. It was a close and integral neighbor, woven into the spiritual and historical fabric from which Christianity emerged. This connection is not merely speculative. Africa plays a significant role in the biblical story itself. A clear example of this is seen when Jesus' family fled to Egypt, part of the African continent, to escape the deadly decree of King Herod. When Herod sought to kill the infant Jesus, Mary and Joseph found refuge in Egypt, and they were not entering an unknown or hostile land. Egypt, a major power of Africa, had long been regarded as a place of sanctuary, wisdom, and spiritual depth. By seeking refuge in Egypt, Jesus' family followed a well-trodden path, one rooted in the ancient civilizations of Africa, civilizations already revered in the biblical narrative. Jesus' childhood in Africa is not a mere footnote in his life. It is a crucial chapter that connected him to African soil from his earliest years. Though this sojourn may have been brief, it symbolizes a profound link between Jesus and the African continent, which had long been part of the biblical landscape. This episode also underscores the intertwined histories of Africa and the Jewish people, as Egypt had historically served as a place of refuge for the Israelites, and once again, it offered shelter during Jesus' early years. Moreover, Africa's profound influence on the spread and development of Christianity cannot be overstated. In the centuries that followed Jesus' death, Christianity quickly took root in North Africa, becoming a dominant force in the region. North Africa was home to some of the earliest and most influential Christian communities. Alexandria, Egypt, emerged as one of the principal centers of Christian thought and theological discourse. Influential figures such as Origen, Clement of Alexandria, and St. Augustine, who was of Berber descent, were pivotal in shaping early Christian theology and philosophy. These African theologians were not peripheral contributors. They were central architects of the Christian tradition, playing crucial roles in defining the doctrines and practices that would become foundational to the faith. The history of Ethiopia further highlights the deep African roots of Christianity. Ethiopia's Christian legacy reaches back to one of the earliest recorded conversions in the Book of Acts. Philip the Apostle encountered an Ethiopian eunuch, a high-ranking official in the court of the Queen of Ethiopia. Following a profound spiritual experience, Philip baptized the eunuch, marking one of the earliest conversions to Christianity outside the Jewish community. This moment is not only significant for its role in the expansion of the faith, but also for its affirmation of Ethiopia's early adoption of Christianity. Long before the Roman Empire embraced Christianity, Ethiopia had already integrated it into its national identity. In fact, Ethiopia would go on to become one of the first nations to officially adopt Christianity as its state religion, a testament to Africa's central role in the development of the faith. Given this rich African legacy, how should we reconsider our understanding of Jesus today? Envisioning a Black Jesus is not about imposing a modern or anachronistic interpretation onto history. Rather, it is an acknowledgement of the profound connections between Jesus, his historical context, and Africa. The portrayal of a Black Jesus is historically plausible, grounded in the geographical and cultural realities of the time. It serves as a reminder that early African Christians were not passive recipients of a European religion. They were active participants and contributors to the faith from its inception. Christianity, far from being a purely European phenomenon, was deeply influenced by Africa from its earliest days. Thus, the image of Jesus as a Black man is not only reasonable, but rooted in the historical facts of his life and the African context that played a pivotal role in early Christianity's formation. By recognizing this intertwined history, we come to understand that the story of Jesus and the story of Africa are inseparable, and that Jesus' African roots are a vital part of his enduring legacy. 2. Why it was forgotten. Erasure and rewriting history. If the African origins of Christianity and the plausibility of a Black Jesus were so intrinsic to the faith's early history, How did this legacy become obscured? The answer lies within a nuanced matrix of historical, cultural, and political forces that gradually reshaped not only the image of Jesus, but also the very essence of the Christian narrative itself. A major turning point occurred in the 4th century when the Roman Empire, under Emperor Constantine, adopted Christianity. This moment transformed the faith from a marginalized and often persecuted sect into the official religion of the world's most powerful empire. Yet this newfound legitimacy came with a cost. As Christianity became intertwined with the political and cultural life of the Roman Empire, and later with Europe as a whole, the faith began to reflect the dominant European ideals and prejudices of the time. This process dramatically altered perceptions of Jesus. As Christianity spread across Europe, the image of Jesus was gradually reshaped to reflect European ideals of divinity and authority. In an emerging social framework where whiteness became synonymous with purity, moral superiority, and power, artistic depictions of Jesus mirrored these values. By the time of the Renaissance, European artists and theologians had solidified the image of Jesus as a pale-skinned, blue-eyed figure, far removed from his historical origins in the Middle East. This reimagining of Jesus not only catered to European aesthetic standards, but also reinforced a racial hierarchy that positioned whiteness, and thus European identity, as the embodiment of moral and spiritual authority. However, this Europeanization of Jesus was not a simple matter of aesthetics. It was deeply interwoven with the political and colonial ambitions of European powers. As Europe embarked on a period of colonial expansion into Africa, Asia, and the Americas, the need to justify these conquests became paramount. Central to this colonial project was the belief that Europeans were the chosen bearers of Christian civilization, destined to bring the light of the gospel to so-called heathen lands. A white Jesus was essential to this narrative, portraying Europe as the heart of Christianity, and Europe's role in civilizing the world as divinely ordained. The idea of a black Jesus, or one with African ties, would have undermined the racial hierarchies that supported colonialism, thereby threatening the ideological framework that legitimized European imperialism. The erasure of black Jesus was thus part of a broader effort to reshape Christianity to serve the goals of European colonialism. By promoting a white Jesus, European powers could maintain the illusion of racial superiority while simultaneously minimizing Africa's significant role in the formation of early Christianity. This historical revision extended beyond visual portrayals of Christ. It involved the systematic erasure or marginalization of the rich Christian traditions that had existed in Africa long before the arrival of European missionaries. Take Ethiopia, for instance. Ethiopia's Christian heritage dates back to the 4th century when it became one of the earliest nations to adopt Christianity as its official religion. Yet, when European missionaries arrived in Africa centuries later, they often disregarded or dismissed these well-established Christian traditions. In the colonial narrative, Africa was frequently depicted as a dark, pagan land in need of spiritual salvation, a place untouched by Christianity until European intervention. Missionaries positioned themselves as the saviors of African souls, perpetuating the myth that they were bringing Christianity to a continent that had never known it. In reality, Africa had been home to flourishing Christian communities for centuries, with centers of theological thought in places like Alexandria and Christian luminaries like St. Augustine shaping the global faith. This suppression of Africa's Christian history was part of a broader strategy aimed at maintaining European dominance. By erasing or diminishing the role of African Christianity, European powers could reinforce the idea that Christianity was inherently European, while Africa's spiritual and intellectual contributions were sidelined. This distorted historical narrative not only erased African agency, but also solidified European control, not just over the lands they colonized, but also over the religious and spiritual consciousness of the colonized peoples. The erasure of Black Jesus, then, was not a singular instance of cultural revision, but part of a broader pattern of historical suppression. It was a calculated effort to rewrite Christianity's story in a way that marginalized Africa's influence and reaffirmed European supremacy. By obscuring the African roots of the faith and the possibility of a Black Jesus, colonial powers sought to suppress the spiritual authority of African people and replace it with a Eurocentric version of Christianity that validated their rule. In this context, the erasure of Black Jesus represents far more than the loss of a particular image. It signifies the erasure of a multifaceted and diverse history of early Christianity. What was lost in this process was not only an accurate understanding of Jesus' ethnic and cultural identity, but also the recognition of Africa's crucial role in the development of Christianity itself. This act of erasure enabled the imposition of a European-centered narrative that has shaped how millions around the world have understood their faith, their history, and their place within it for centuries. 3. Why it matters now. Reclaiming the legacy for racial justice. In a world where racial injustice persists, reclaiming the legacy of Black Jesus is not simply an intellectual or historical endeavor. It is a critical move in addressing the enduring legacies of racism, colonialism, and white supremacy. The act of reclaiming the image of a Black Jesus is a challenge to the structures that have long privileged whiteness as the standard of divinity and power, while marginalizing people of color. For centuries, the image of a white Jesus has been used to justify racial hierarchies, both in religious settings and within broader societal frameworks. White Jesus became a symbol of authority, purity, and domination, wielded as a tool to support systems that elevated whiteness while subordinating others. This distortion of the historical Jesus has perpetuated the belief that God's favor aligns with whiteness, positioning non-white peoples as other, lesser, or outside the scope of divine favor. These images permeated Christian art, literature, and theology, shaping the ways millions conceptualize God and power. Reclaiming the image of a Black Jesus fundamentally disrupts these narratives. A Black Jesus challenges the idea of whiteness as the ultimate divine ideal, offering instead a vision of Christianity that is inclusive, liberative, and connected to the lived experiences of the oppressed. It counters the long-standing portrayal of a distant, white Eurocentric Christ by presenting a Jesus deeply engaged with the marginalized, especially those of African descent. In this way, Black Jesus represents not merely an aesthetic shift, but a profound theological and symbolic rupture from traditions that have upheld white supremacy within religious institutions and society. For many Black Christians, the figure of a Black Jesus is deeply empowering. It affirms that their racial and cultural identity is not at odds with their faith, but is central to it. By reclaiming Jesus as someone who reflects the historical and cultural realities of his time, connected to Africa and the Middle East, Black Christians find dignity, value, and a deeper resonance within their religious practice. Black Jesus reinforces the understanding that God is not aligned with systems of oppression, but with those historically marginalized and silenced. This image of Black Jesus also embodies solidarity with the struggles of Black people throughout history, from the atrocities of slavery and colonization to the fight for civil rights and today's ongoing pursuit of racial justice. Black Jesus is a God who understands suffering, who walks alongside the oppressed in their resistance, offering hope in the face of systemic injustice. This portrayal of Jesus as a figure of solidarity offers both strength and comfort to those engaged in the struggle for justice, reminding them that they are seen, supported, and empowered by a divine presence attuned to their plight. Moreover, reclaiming the legacy of Black Jesus holds transformative implications for the broader church. In an increasingly global and diverse world, it is essential that the church reflect the richness and complexity of the human experience, confronting the historical distortions that erased or marginalized non-European contributions to Christianity, including Jesus's African roots, is a necessary step in presenting a more inclusive and truthful message. By embracing these realities, the Church can speak more authentically to the universal values of justice, love, and unity, while honoring the diverse ways in which these ideals have been expressed and lived throughout history. This task becomes even more relevant in light of contemporary movements such as Black Lives Matter, which have spotlighted the systemic racism deeply embedded in society. These movements challenge institutions, including the Church, to reckon with their complicity in perpetuating inequality, and to take a stand for justice, to remain silent on racial injustice, or to continue upholding a vision of Christianity that reinforces racial hierarchies is to forsake the Church's moral responsibility. Reclaiming Black Jesus offers the Church a path forward, a way to realign with the core tenets of the gospel, which are rooted in compassion, justice, and the uplifting of the oppressed. The message of Black Jesus is also a message of liberation. It calls the Church to re-examine its teachings, practices, and iconography, ensuring that they reflect the diversity and inclusivity inherent in the Christian faith. This is not a superficial shift. It is a deeper commitment to confronting and dismantling the structural inequalities that have been embedded within religious and societal systems alike. By embracing the legacy of Black Jesus, the Church can become a catalyst for a broader movement toward racial justice, positioning itself as an agent of transformation in a world desperately in need of change. Ultimately, reclaiming Black Jesus is about more than correcting historical inaccuracies. It is about offering hope and dignity to communities that have long been told they are inferior or excluded from divine grace. It is about dismantling the false narratives that have upheld white supremacy, replacing them with a truth that honors the humanity and diversity of all people. Reclaiming Black Jesus reminds us that the fight for racial justice is not only a political or social struggle, it is a profoundly spiritual one, with the power to reshape both individuals and institutions toward greater equity, compassion, and inclusion. Conclusion: rediscovering faith and identity. The obscured legacy of Black Jesus is far from being a mere historical footnote. It is a crucial dimension of the Christian narrative, carrying deep implications for our understanding of faith, identity, and justice today. Reclaiming this legacy allows us to transcend the narrow, Eurocentric version of Christianity that has long prevailed, enabling a rediscovery of a faith that is global in scope, inclusive in its reach, and transformative in its power. Black Jesus stands as a profound reminder that the divine is not bound by any single culture, race, or nation. He embodies the presence of the sacred among the marginalized, the oppressed, and the overlooked. His story is one of resilience, hope, and liberation, offering an alternative vision of Christianity, one that rejects domination and embraces a pursuit of justice, equality, and love. In a world marked by division and persistent inequality, rediscovering. The legacy of Black Jesus is not just relevant, it is essential. This task compels us to confront the uncomfortable truths of history while also illuminating a path toward healing and reconciliation. By embracing this forgotten legacy, we not only deepen our spiritual understanding, but also enrich our cultural identity, working together to build a more just, equitable, and inclusive world for all.